Welcome to the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. My name is Shannon Boucher. I'm your host this week. My regular co-conspirator, partner in thought crime, Melanie Bennett, is on other projects, and I'm here to share with you a brief recap of what's going on in the Canadian Gender Wars. I'm going to start today with some global context because, lots of us live, well, we all live in Canada, obviously. But there's lots of stuff going on around the world that is informing the kind of things that are happening in Canada, both in the positive and negative sense. On the negative sense, we forget just how fast the rest of the world is moving. Many people, many organizations in Canada don't actually realize what's going on abroad and are continuing on with their activist missions. And it really puts in context the vast differences in policy around the idea of gender ideology. So I want to start with the UK because there was big news this week in the UK on a couple of fronts, and then we're going to move to France, and then I'm going to share about some of the stuff that's going on in Canada. All right. So the National Health Service, NHS, to cover off the abbreviation, the National Health Service of the UK, which we're now a little more than 3 weeks after CAS, coming up on 4 weeks after CAS in a few days. If I do the quick math, it's 26 days. The National Health Service has issued new guidance stressing biological sex when placing patients in wards. They've actually gone much broader than this. There's been a report released, from what I understand, or a new set of guidelines to reiterate biological reality as the foundation of medicine and the functioning of the National Health Service. What that sounds like to me is that the National Health Service of the UK has been reclaimed from the gender ideologue. So that means no more conversations about menstruating people, about front holes, about people with cervixes, and chest feeders. Biological men are going to be not allowed on female-only wards. There's a bunch of conversation around that in the UK media right now. And the trans activists, as usual, are having a great big victims heyday. But what I'm sharing with you is that the UK is continuing its rapid re-embrace of biological reality and science in the care around people with gender ideation or transgender ideation. Now, SEGM, Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, announced the European Society of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, ESCAP, published a policy statement on child and adolescent gender dysphoria calling on healthcare providers not to promote experimental and unnecessarily invasive treatments with unproven psychosocial effects. Now, if you're curious about what unproven psychosocial effects are, this is in light of the CAS report. Of course, there is no science backing up these kinds of interventions with children, and there is a warning now from the European Society of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Now, in France, coming across the channel, French senators proposed to imprison doctors who prescribe puberty blockers to under 18s. Now, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that in Italy, they're actually starting conversations. And of course, I don't get the Italian translations, but what I understand is that there may be criminal charges involved in a gender clinic in Italy. So we've got French senators. Now, this is they're moving towards legislation on this issue, and the draft documents, as we know, if we're following any Canadian issues, it takes a while to get through to approval. But the threat is 2 years in prison on this proposed set of legislations in France. Okay. Now, again, global context. We have yet another study that's come out. It was released last month, but really only hit the sort of news cycle and the research cycle and landed on Twitter in the last week or so. That people who undergo gender transition have a 12.1 times higher rate of effective suicide following those surgeries and interventions. Now, we've known that for an awful long time. When I studied abnormal psychology, I did 2 years of AbPsych when I was in college. And We've known for a long time that the suicide rates in the transgender at the time, we were going back 30 years or so, and that this was post-transition AGP male who were more prone to suicides. Not news. Yet the gender ideologues pushing their narrative, claiming actually that gender transition is what's saving people from suicide. So NHS, going back to biological reality, we've got Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, a European psychiatric organization, is saying don't do anything that is unproven with children. We've got the French senators drafting a legislation that's going to put people in jail for 2 years for giving puberty blockers to children. And then we've got yet another study that says the rate of suicide goes up with medical transition. Now, Jordan Peterson published a link to that study. Jordan Peterson, love him or hate him, is one of the most cited psychologists academically in the world and carries an awful lot of weight when it comes to his academic chops. So when he's putting up a piece of research and talking about it, I lean towards the belief that Dr. Peterson has done his work to evaluate this study. There were 15 million people, subjects in this. The gender affirming surgery group was 1,500 in the main cohort. So they had some control populations. They had a period of time which they evaluated these populations and came to these conclusions. Again, not the first piece in the last little while, confirming that risks go up with gender affirming care, not down. Now, in Canada, this week, Ari Blaff, who's a journalist with the National Post, put up a long piece called "Who's Carl? When Parents Are the Last to Know About Their Trans Kids." Ari's been working on this for a little while. I want to say I talked to him in late January or early February. I was one of the 10 parents that he interviewed for this piece. In the body of the piece, I'm not named, but I am quoted at the end about an incident that happened with schools and with the Canadian Anti-Hate Network to do with my daughter. I want to take a minute to say, because if you're watching this and you're not gender critical, you know, maybe the light bulb is going on in your mind. You have a child who is trans and or claims to be trans or has these ideations, and the schools are supporting it. Maybe you're a child who's been transitioned, and maybe I'm thinking about my own daughter here and so many other kids. It's time to come home. These are lies. You've been told lies. The school system has lied to you. Child and Family Services has lied to you. You've been told lies on the internet. The teachers have been lying to you. The entire system has been lying to you, and it's time to come home because your parents love you. Ari Blaff talked about social services getting involved in cases where the child isn't affirmed sufficiently at home, according to reports. Chanel followed before she went offline. She's taking a social media break. If you don't know Chanel, she is in Ottawa, now resides in Ottawa, a former teacher who was investigated and no longer teaches because she criticized ideology in the classroom. Put up a piece this week or just before she went offline, from the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. It's basically a criteria sheet on how to interrogate a child to figure out if they're in danger or not, if they're safe or not, and how to know when to keep secrets from parents. So I recommend Ari Blaff's piece if you're a parent to read about how this is happening. We've been hearing about Child and Family Services and CAS in British Columbia, and parents being very afraid, going back a couple of years, of custody issues and child and family services showing up to apprehend children. And we've been hearing news about that. California, Australia, various progressive states in the U.S. where the same thing is happening. I heard reports from a parent in Montreal last year where his kid is now aged out of the system, but there were investigations around his failure to affirm sufficiently in a custody dispute. And when these machineries of bureaucracy start to get weaponized, our kids are the ones who suffer. So in the context of the Cass report and of all this science that's coming out around this issue, we are still in a situation where if parents don't affirm sufficiently, where the schools are so captured that they will undermine parents' loving relationships with their kids in order to affirm the child in this bizarre ideology. On to Adam Zivo. Sunday last week, Adam Zivo released an interview with Daniel Smith. It was about 30 minutes long, a really exceptional conversation. I think Daniel Smith is one of the most important leaders, if not the most important leader in Canada right now. Not just on this issue, but a bunch of others. She is a real force. She is not afraid to lead and take controversial positions and take the position that's right. So if you have a chance, check out that interview. I believe it's only on the National Post. I did look for it on YouTube as well. But she has said, as of May 4th, that was Saturday, that she's embracing the science-based policies related to healthcare for trans-identified people of the Cass report. She's spoken with Hilary Cass. This actually means, I think, some bigger changes in Alberta. There was some hints 2 weeks ago that Daniel Smith wasn't going to be getting into the debate about modesty and change rooms and facilities as such. And when you get into the science of what's going on, I don't think that she can continue with that without addressing that policy in the upcoming legislative framework. Now, we expect that by November in Alberta. The policy work takes time, consultation takes time, and they're doing the work on this and moving Canada forward with Alberta in the lead on this issue because Ottawa is completely lost. We're wrapped up in this ideology here at the federal level. The Liberals are never going to admit that this is a problem. It will come out after the fact, but it's one of the underlying reasons why the Liberals have lost so much support, because they have gone gung-ho on activist organizations and funding, this perennial victim narrative about identity in all kinds of different identity groups. LGBTQS2 Spirit IA plus, I don't know what even the official acronym. It's changing as fast as the radical transgender flag is now. That's come out with yet another iteration this week. So I'm going to talk about flags in a second, but let's jump to Ottawa. Construction begins on a LGBTQS plus national monument in Ottawa. There was something called the Great Purge. Kids are learning about this in school now. The Great Purge of gays and lesbians who were purged from the military and the government and were hunted out of their jobs and things like that. And you know what? There was discrimination and prejudice against gay and lesbian people in Canada in the past. We have overcome that, thankfully. And there were policies in place where you weren't allowed to be out in the military, and if you were found to be homosexual, there was some belief that there was there was political issues with this. And during the McCarthyist era and post-McCarthyist era, if you were homosexual, you were considered to be communist, or there was that argument in that relationship made. So I don't want to undermine or take away from the fact that there was discrimination against gays and lesbians in the past. But that's not the case today. And nevertheless, the victims are so, worthy of recognition, and we need to wallow in this in such an eternal fashion that the federal government, and I'm assuming the National Capital Commission, are dropping $8 million to build the Thunderhead Monument in Ottawa to commemorate the victims of the LGBTQSIA purge. And the others, of course, who've been marginalized for who they really are. Do we need a monument? This is the only monument of its kind in the world. And I would say that at this point, as the gender bubble is crashing down, that we don't want to be leaders on this particular issue anymore. Speaking of leaders and flags, I had it in my mind as I was hearing this chatter in the last little bit that the Woodstock mayor was not allowing pride banners, flags on lampposts. I had it in my mind that was Woodstock, Ontario. It's not. It's Woodstock, New Brunswick. And we got a couple New Brunswick stories this week to cover off. A town's mayor defends policy that prohibits pride banners on lampposts. So this is published in CTV News Atlantic. New Brunswick mayor defending her town's policy that will prohibit pride banners from being displayed on lampposts in the community. And of course, the Rainbow Brigade says that this is a harmful message. The mayor is basically saying that we're going to use our public space for flags to support tourism in the region and to support and to fly the flags of the province and the country, which isn't or shouldn't be an objectionable kind of position. But in the world of eternal victimization of these rainbow activists, that is effrontery. Now, going along with some activists and effrontery, Deanna Sharif, Kareem Assad, a lawyer from Toronto, a journalist. She's doing really great work. I had a chance to have breakfast with her here in Ottawa in the fall, have a great conversation before she dropped a really important document about the Canadian Anti-Hate Network and how the CAHN fabricates stories that get picked up by the news cycle. And one of those that's back in the news cycle, I'm getting tangential here at the moment, is Diagolon. Diagolon is a meme group. And as I'm reading more about this, the Diagolon is an idea of a country in North America that goes from Alaska to Florida in a diagonal line. It's a joke. But during the trucker convoy a couple of years ago, Diagolon was tagged by the Canadian Anti-Hate Network as an actual group, which it's not, and as a hate group, which it's not, and as a white supremacist group, which it's not, and all the other isms and phobias and all of those things. So Diagolon's back in the news. Kareem Assad reported this. She's got a great piece if you want to understand just how bent this story is. It is complete propaganda and fabrication by the liberals to try and attack Pierre Poilievre. It's a big lie. And the media is eating it up. Diagolon does not exist. Okay? Now, one of these people that Karima Assad profiles on a regular basis, Deanna Sharif. And Sharif is a protester here in Ottawa who seems to have got a start in the Rainbow Brigade protests and has of late been involved with the pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas protests. She brings her young child to these, some videos of Deanna Sharif and her kid and the way she behaves. Like I feel very badly for her daughter. Anyhow, Sharif, who's been using noisemakers like piercing whistles, has been involved in physical altercations. Last June 9th was involved in a fight in the protest scrum, pulling somebody by the hair, from what I recall. Was finally arrested, not because she was assaulting anybody, any counter protesters, which she does, or being abusive and belligerent and causing problems with her 120 decibel noisemaker she points at people. She interfered with police arresting somebody, and in that process assaulted the police officer and was remanded to custody, arrested. 2 charges of assault against a police officer, serious stuff. And from what I recall now, Sharif, I don't know how, I don't have the update, but was denied bail. So I don't know if she's out yet. She was arrested last Saturday, and I have a little bit of Schadenfreude, the joy in someone else's suffering here, which I don't revel in very often. But Deanna has stuck the knife in me metaphorically a few times. She gets very nasty and personal, and you've created your own reality here, Deanna. Enjoy your victimhood. All right, New Brunswick still, or segueing back to New Brunswick, Egal Canada paid opposition, an activist arm of the Liberal government receiving millions of dollars a year to act as paid opposition, is using its dollars to fight provincial premiers on the issue of, in the case of New Brunswick, Policy 713. 713 is around pronouns and affirmations at school, and there's a number of other things like kids, boys who identify as girls sleeping in girls' cabins on trips, and it's a whole package. And so Egal has been granted intervener status, which means they're going to get to testify on behalf of the LGBTQIA, your taxpayer dollars given to them by 7 different federal government departments and the province of Ontario, as well as corporations, are going to fight to continue and perpetuate the hold that the gender radical activists who keep secrets from parents in control of the the New Brunswick education system. Now, the unions, 3 unions in New Brunswick this week, were denied intervener status. They were trying to argue that this was violating the charter rights of expression of teachers. The judge denied 3 of those teachers' unions intervener status. And we have friends there. Gender Dysphoria Alliance, which is the executive from GD Alliance, has shifted over and evolved into LGBT Courage Coalition, which is an international organization, but nevertheless, LGBT Alliance, Gender Dysphoria Alliance, pardon me, was founded by Aaron Kimberley and others in Canada, has been granted intervener status, and so has Our Duty Canada intervener status. So we're going to get some representation in court. I'm hoping that the global context here about what's happening in the UK, the discovery of the CAST report, the move to the science on this issue. We've got the Psychiatric Association in Europe who's talking about this, so many others. To be able to, I'm hoping that the activists are this time going to be outgunned by reality. What else do we have? The last thing, again in New Brunswick, there is an education. There's the conflict. The Anglophone East District Education Council is in the midst of a legal battle over Policy 713. The District Education Council is proceeding with litigation over the changes to 713, arguing that they're unconstitutional, could be harmful to students, and also believing the mandatory parental consent requirements go against the Provincial Human Rights Act. I'm going to finish on this with the Human Rights Act. These institutions are going to have to come down. There is going to have to be a major overhaul of these human rights institutions, these non-governmental, basically executive branch enforcement agencies who make up their own rules without being elected, are going to have to go through a radical revamp. We hide everything in Canada. This is different than the UK. The UK, it was still just about inclusion, about being nice, and there's some Gender Recognition Act in law, But in Canada, we have this baked into layers of provincial policy making. So what has happened is that Ontario is an example here, and by far not isolated. BC is actually worse. But in 2014, the Ontario Human Rights Commission added gender identity and expression to the Human Rights Act of Ontario as a protected class. Now, the protected classes are disability, sex, race, sexual orientation. There's a number of them, and the idea here in the law framework is that people in those protected classes can't be discriminated against by on the basis of their immutable characteristics. So that's housing, contracts, employment, memberships, something else. But what they've done is they published a policy interpretation of that. And then based on their policy interpretation, which is more positivist, it moves away from the direct discrimination in those protected categories to a broader framework, which could be deemed a violation of human rights. And then there was a directive to, for example, school boards to develop their own policies around gender expression. And none of this has actually been tested in law. And it is now, it's basically created an environment where you have to walk on eggshells for fear of offending somebody. And we've made offense a potential violation of human rights. All of that to say, things are moving very, very fast here. It occurred to me last night, I can't remember if this is Groucho Marx or if it was Charlie Chaplin, and when they were asked about going bankrupt and how it happened. And the answer was, well, it happened very slowly and then all at once. And what we've seen in the world of gender ideology and gender identity activism is a very slow capture while people have been sleeping on this issue. And it's been a lot of work to try and break this down, how to reassert reality, but bit by bit, piece by piece. We have organizations, we have the systematic reviews. There are 6 comprehensive systematic reviews behind the CAST review. The science is coming out, policy is changing, and it's going to become very clear very fast just how toxic this identity is. My prediction is next Pride season, so Pride season's coming up, of course, beginning of June. We have the flag waving and raising and all of that. In a couple of weeks, we've got Faye Johnstone trying to do a national march for LGBTQ rights and the usual to try and upstage and out maneuver parents in the country. Beginning of June, first Monday is Day of Absence. June the 3rd, that's the flag raising day. So if you have children in the education system, start thinking now about how you might collaborate with other parents to, just do something else with your kids that day. Go to the museum, go to the park, get them together and consume some wholesome media, that kind of thing, activities, rather than go to the Pride flag raising festivals. A year from now, the conversation that's happening in Woodstock, New Brunswick, in the mayor's council there, is going to be everywhere in Canada. This monument, this $8 million Thunderdome monument or Thunderhead or whatever it is going to be a monument for all of the wrong reasons in Canada about just how captured we became, how toxic this victim's ideology grew into, and how many children. I mean, I'm sorry for the people who were outed and lost their jobs because they were gay or lesbian decades ago, but that's nothing in comparison to what we're doing to children now. I'm up to some shenanigans, and causing some trouble. My effort right now is to shut down the CHEO Gender Clinic here in Ottawa, Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, seeing between 400 and 500 children a year, referred sometimes in secret by schools who are keeping secrets from parents, convincing kids they're born in the wrong body, putting them on a list. The CHEO accepts referrals from counselors and from teachers and from other educators within the system to the CHEO Gender Clinic, where kids are given puberty blockers. Right, it's going to land you in jail in France, but we do it here in Canada on a first appointment. Cross-sex hormones and all of the gender affirmation that an ideologue could possibly want. Last week, I wrote to Alex Munter, the CEO of CHEO, as well as the two directors of education here in Ottawa, the director of the Catholic School Board and the Public School Board. I haven't heard back except for a polite, we received your email from the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. But that's not the end of my efforts here. It's the beginning. I will document that a little bit as I go. I'm not going to tell you what my next steps are, but I am working to get to the trustees and send letters to them, and as well as the boards of directors of CHEO and the CHEO Foundation, which raises millions and millions of dollars a year. With the story selling to people that Children's Hospital is all about doing good things for kids. And when it comes out of what's been happening at the CHEO Gender Clinic, I'm going to be very surprised if there is not a significant negative impact on fundraising for CHEO. That's the Canadian Gender Wars Report for this week. My name is Shannon Boucher. You can find me on Twitter at Shannon B. Douglas. And check out my co-host Melanie on other projects was a guest with Benjamin Boyce and his, I can picture her face, counselor, therapist, Leslie. Anyway, great long conversation between Benjamin, Leslie, and Melanie that went up on YouTube yesterday. Check that out this week. I hope you have a terrific week. I've got some announcements coming up of some events. We'll talk about that more next week as I get some more details. And stay real, people.